obviously in New York since I'm a 2-call.
Thank you.
And I was pretty active on 6 meters on the East Coast. I understand from talking to a few people here that nobody seems to really operate 6 meters that much here. Been here now 4 years and finally kind of getting my station set back up again, so I'm hoping to try and get back on 6 meters. But it's a pretty interesting band, and I thought I'd do a small presentation for anybody that's interested in it. Since most radios seem to have 6 meters available, the antenna systems are really pretty simple. You can build a dipole or a very simple 2 or 3 element beam with a minimal amount of materials. So 6 meter, as we know, is a VHF band. It actually has characteristics of HF and VHF. It also displays propagation mechanisms, a number of different ones, and we'll discuss those as I go through. The band is very, very wide, from 50 to 54 megahertz, so there's plenty of opportunity to find some part of the band to play on. A little bit about the history of 6 meters. Before World War II and for a very short time thereafter, the 5 meter band and 2.5 meter bands were in use by hams, being 56 megahertz and 112 megahertz respectively. The original TV channel 1 was 48 to 54 megahertz, but unfortunately for ham radio, this channel was dropped and 50 to 54 megahertz became the 6 meter band. If you remember, the old TV had the tuners, started on channel 2, and some very old continuously tunable TV sets had channel 1. During the mid to late 1940s, there was a channel 1 for a limited time. It was a 1,000-watt experimental station, TV station, non-commercial, that transmitted from the Empire State Building in New York City. During that period, the FCC was working out the frequencies for FM broadcast and television. Since frequencies changed, most TVs at the time had tunable VFOs, not channelized like today. The original FM band was 44 to 50 megahertz. Then the FCC allocated 5 meters to television channel 2 and gave hams 6 meter access. 6 meter frequency allocations for amateur radio are not universal worldwide. In the United States and Canada, the band ranges from 50 to 54 megahertz. Pardon me. In some other countries, the band is restricted to military communications. Further, in some nations, the frequency range is used for television transmissions, although most countries have assigned those television channels to higher frequencies. The ITU does not allocate 6 meter frequencies to amateurs in Europe. The decline of VHF television broadcasts and commercial pressure on the lower VHF spectrum has allowed most European countries to provide 6 meter amateur allocation. So when I was in New York, it wasn't uncommon when the propagation was there to work a number of different countries in Europe on 6. Because the 6 meter band is just below the frequencies allocated to the old VHF television channel 2 in North America, TV interference to neighbors' TV set was a common problem for amateurs operating on this band prior to June 2009, when VHF TV transmissions ended in the US. So on 6 meters, you can really do almost anything that could be done on an HF band. You can do work to all states, work to all continents, VUCC and VXCC on 6. 6 meters can sound like a contest weekend on 20 filled with signals and pilots up galore. But what makes it different from the HF bands is that you never know what the excitement or when the excitement will come. Ear-blasting cacophony of signals can change into a completely dead band in only a few minutes, or vice versa. It is very interesting because many times you'll turn 6 meters on and you hear nothing. And then other times, all of a sudden, signals will just come up out of the noise level and it'll be very, very active. And then if it's a sporadic E in particular, it'll just drop off after sometimes a few minutes, sometimes after hours. 6 meters offers nearly every kind of propagation. At the peak of the sun cycle, when the solar flux rises between 150 and 200, the F layer skip familiar to HF operators can provide worldwide contacts on 6. If the flux goes significantly above 200 ds, work on 6 can even get fairly reliable. Propagation modes are familiar to VHF operators such as Sporadic E, Auroral, meteor scatter, trans-equatorial, and moon bounce, all being used on 6 meters. So we can get F2, Sporadic E, Auroral, trans-equatorial ducting, meteor scatter, and moon bounce. So for F2 propagation, it's the same as on HF. We're going to be bouncing a signal off the ionosphere and make long-distance communications. We found that in 25 years of operating on 6 meters, F2 is not a particularly prevalent propagation method. Sporadic E is usually more reliable. This is an antenna stack for a station in Maine. Those are all 6-meter antennas stacked. If the band isn't open, the band is open for this guy. He's he really makes some really amazing contacts. And he's the first guy, as I said, he's in coastal Maine. He's the first guy to work Europe every day when the band is open in the summertime. Sporadic E is a typical, in my experience, mode of propagation on 6 meters. In the morning, typically, say, New England or New York to Florida is a typical single hop Sporadic E. Multi-hop, which I have done on a number of occasions, but is more rare. You can work the east coast to the west coast on multi-hop Sporadic E. Sporadic E is really most prevalent from about April to the beginning of August and sometimes in January on 6 meters. This is a website, DX Sherlock, and he runs his own private website. I think he's in Portugal. But he runs maps throughout the world, and he shows in real time the current propagation and what the methods are. When I first got on 6 meters, sideband was very, very popular. Unfortunately, in the last 8-9 years, everybody's gone over to FT8. Really personally like talking to people on sideband. It's much preferable to the digital contacts, but that's the way that the hobby has gone. Aurora, which is pretty neat. You talk to people due west by pointing your antenna towards the North Pole. It kind of sounds like you're underwater. It is an interesting propagation method, and you never really know where your signal is going to land when you beam your signal to the north if you have a beam. But yeah, that's also another method that you can use. And trans-equatorial propagation. So trans-equatorial propagation is about a 5,000-mile hop. It's typical that the signal is going to be equal north and south of the equator. So from this area to, say, Brazil or Argentina would be a typical TEP hop. But this map shows some TEP hops from Japan down to Australia, or from Hawaii down to Australia.
I know they talk about the water circling the other way down the drain south of the equator. When you cross the equator, do your words turn around, come out backwards?
Could be.
You got to do reverse.
Comes out reverse, right? Backwards. Then we have ducting. So usually ducting occurs over water. Your signal actually travels at a height of 30 feet or less. And it wasn't unusual to see people in New England making contacts down into the Caribbean by ducting in summertime. And a gentleman, Mr. Hepburn, came up with a good forecasting method. I have no idea how he does it, but he's able to put together maps and show what the forecasting methods would be for 6 meters and particularly for 2-meter operators to make long-distance contacts by ducting, which, of course, in the summertime is most prevalent. Yes, sir?
What do the colors represent on that?
So the warmer the colors, the hotter the signal propagation is going to be. So if it's real blue, like way up here north, probably not going to be making much of a And then meteor scatter. Meteor scatter is typically a digital mode during like the Perseid meteor showers or that type of event. You can get on your computer and use software to make contacts with that. And, I actually seen on 6 meter sideband contacts during particularly busy meteor scatter events. Of course, it's a very short-lived event because the ionization trail is very short, but that's another way that you can make contacts on 6. And then EME. There's some crazy people out there that have setups for making moon bounce contacts. Most people make schedules, or as far as I know, everybody makes schedules because of the timing that you need. And you need obviously software to do it. It's a digital contact. It's not sideband or anything like that. Some people get some pretty big arrays. And,
Stand in front of that one.
yeah, I'm sure he gets good reception.
If they had an amplifier on
I don't think you need a radio to receive that frequency.
Anybody except a novice can operate on 6. You have full privileges on all bands, so no reason not to get on. Some favorite 6 meter frequencies. If you want to get on the band and just listen to see if there's any propagation from 5010 to 5000 is the CW beacons. Local beacon here that I pick up all the time is from the RCA club. And then CWDX window is 50.090. Sideband DX window is 50.115 and 5125, the single sideband calling frequency, which used to be very active, but everybody's gone to digital on 6, so you're up at 50.313 or 318 for FT4. This actually, unfortunately, probably a little hard to read, but this is a list of all the different types of operating that you can do on 6, both in FM. You can do remote control for, remote control airplanes or boats or that type of thing. So there's really a lot of opportunities since we have so much bandwidth on 6 meters to operate. And lastly, we talk a little bit about grid squares. Grid square is kind of a unique thing to 6 meters and even 2 meters. They've broken up the entire world into 1 degree by 2 degree grids. And one of the fun things to do on 6 meters during contest is to see how many grids you can work. There is actually an award given by the ARL, the Fred Fish Award, for anybody that works all the grid squares in the continental United States. I think there's only about 7 or 8 people that have actually managed to do it. I actually have a pin map just like this, and pretty much any grid east of the Mississippi I worked, not maybe a third of the grids west of the Mississippi. Very hard, there's just not a lot of people out in portions of the west to activate grid squares. So this is a fun thing to do during contesting too, is to run multiple grid squares. A lot of people like to do that. Don't need much to get on 6 meters. You need a radio that can run 6 meters and a simple antenna. You got a J-pole. Somebody was talking about this type of antenna earlier. Works very well on 6 meters. If you want to get a little fancier, you can get a beam antenna, an amplifier, although I had an amplifier that worked on 6 meters, really not necessary 99% of the time. 100 watts is plenty. Plenty of people that like to work CW or, of course, digital. Simple beam, there's many websites that have plans for 6 meter beams. They're pretty easy to build. They're small. They're even much smaller than a 10 meter beam, so pretty easy to stick up with a TV type rotor or just on a pole in your backyard. That's about it. Anybody have any questions?
On the propagation stuff, as far as even using SCADs, and I've seen SCADs, and wondered what would I use this for, other than remind me to change bands later on.
Right.
But here it seems a lot more intentional, and and the propagation change so quickly, are you targeting these certain activities like a meteor scatter or an F2 or some of these layers that I've got grids to hit in certain areas, so I'm looking for a type of propagation. What kind of strategy, I guess, is involved with using those charts? And
Well, unfortunately,
schedules?
there isn't a strategy for 6 meters because it's so unpredictable.
Okay, so you're kind of obeying with the conditions.
Yeah, exactly. I worked, when I was in New York, I worked some very rare grid squares in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The guy just happened to be on the radio that day, and the propagation Sporadic E allowed us to make contact. That was like after 15 years of operating, it just happened. There's no rhyme or reason to where the band goes. So it's very unpredictable. There's really no way. Now, of course, if you're doing EME, that's something else. You're bouncing signals off the moon. And that has to be done digitally and has to be done very specific time. So set up on a website. There's a website for that.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's just hit or miss.
Okay.
Sporadic E is most, as I said, is most active between April and August, and then January is also another Sporadic E time. But that, again, is hit or miss. Typically, you'll hear the radio is active in the morning. Could be 6, 7 in the morning till 9, 10, maybe. And then again in the afternoon. Usually the middle of the day, not so much.
Is this following Great Line activities like we'd see with 10 or something? There's events that you can take advantage of, or
I never experienced Gray Line on 6 meters. I just never did. I was on 6 meters a lot before I moved here to Indiana.
so it's a pretty steady coming on and falling off.
Yeah,
as the band
it's
breaks.
pretty mostly Sporadic E
Okay.
is what you're typically going to find. Occasionally F2, I do work Japan, which is an over the polar route. That was
Okay.
pretty exciting, but that was also digital.
Because of these changes, is it cumbersome for a builder then to build antennas or to test equipment?
No.
That if the band could be dead while you're trying to build something.
Well, there's always beacons that you can pick up.
Okay,
So,
right. You mentioned
somewhere here in
RCAs.
Indianapolis is the RCA club, and they operate a 6 meter beacon, and I can pick it up with a dipole that's in the attic of my house. So yeah, you can always test your equipment that way. Yeah. Any other questions?
Are there any 6 meter repeaters around anymore?
If you get a hold of the Auroral repeater handbook, it lists 6 meter repeaters on FM. I never worked any. There was a couple when I lived in New York, but I never actually managed to activate one. Supposedly there are some around.
Probably nobody on.
I think there was.
I mean, we find somebody on 2 meters is hard enough sometimes.
There's one in West Lafayette, according to the repeater book app.
Okay. Any other questions?
Is there a technical reason why you find maybe people in the Midwest aren't using 6 meters as much as the East Coast? Or I'm assuming. that-
No, I actually haven't really gotten on the band very much. I operated digitally during a couple of contests here. I like to work the ARL VHF contest, and I also work the defunct now, but CQ Magazine still runs VHF, UHF contests in the summertime. And actually, if you've never actually done contesting, which was something else I also like to do on HF, but the CQ Magazine VHF or UHF contest in the summertime is a great opportunity, and I actually won a number of awards from them because a lot of people just don't bother to send their logs in. So they send you a really nice certificate, and it's free, so it's worthwhile to try that out. But yeah, no particular reason really.
Is there anybody in the room that does 6 meter? Or maybe.
I mentioned it to a few people here, and everybody's like, "Oh, 6 meters always dead here in the Midwest." So I'm like,
I'd get
okay.
on it during the HF contest. I hope that something's there. But it seems like there's versatility in that both you can run on VHF or if it's a HF specific. You know, typically see the bands all the way
I know
up
the
to
gain
6.
on my antenna on 6 meters is insane.
So that's it. Any other questions?
What's the typical ground wave footprint? Because I know for field day, the only time I ever use 6 meters is for our field day ops. We always do a sched with one of the W9SU down south side. They're south of Indy for their field day setup. We always do message traffic with them,
Okay.
and it's been reliable the last couple of years. But I was just curious what the typical.
So I don't know here because I haven't operated
Sure.
that way here. When I was in New York, I used to work guys in Connecticut during contests that were about 60 to 70 miles away from me, which I'm assuming was ground wave. So, but not flat like it is here. It's
Right.
very hilly. So, yeah, you could probably do something like
And they're roughly in that, not quite that far, but yeah, it makes sense.
And the skip zone is still the skip zone, right? I mean, it's if you're bouncing it off the ionosphere.
Again, it depends because if you work in sporadic E, it could be a very short distance. Yeah.
Is polarization a consideration? Is this mostly horizontal?
Not really. That's the really interesting thing. And you don't need a lot of power during contest. I used to work with people that were QRP and had signals just as good as people that were running a lot of power and had big beams. It's a very interesting band in that regard. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.